welcome to today's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break, where we are thrilled to welcome Dr. Edward Barksdale Jr. to the conversation. Dr. Barksdale serves as Surgeon-in-Chief at University Hospital's Rainbows Babies and Children's Hospital and holds the Robert A. Eisant Professor of Surgery and Pediatrics Chair at Case Western Reserve School of Medicine. In addition to his excellent work in the surgical suite and the classroom, he is a passionate advocate for children's health care in the community. He is widely known and well respected for his extensive community service in child welfare, violence prevention, and addressing health disparities. His own childhood was spent in Lynchburg, Virginia, in the peak years of the civil rights struggle in the 1960s. His parents were two of four co-defendants in the integration of the Lynchburg public schools. In his words, social service and social justice were the backdrop of my family life. He dreamed of becoming an astronaut or a doctor and said, although I lived in a world of black and white, I dreamed in color. Well, his dreams came true with degrees from Yale and Harvard and training at the most prestigious medical centers in the country. He continues to dream big. His work here is the perfect marriage of a head for science and a heart for social justice. This is evidenced by his creation of a hospital-based violence intervention for teens called the Antifragility Initiative. Dr. Barksdale, thank you for joining us today.
Ms. Crosley, thank you so much for the introduction. This is always the moment of great anxiety when I attempt to queue up my presentation. So hopefully I'll be able to have this all work. Sorry, it didn't work as planned. Can everyone see my slides? Is that fine? Oh, great. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. As I look at the screen, I see some new friends and some old friends, and this is an absolute delight. I'd like to speak to you today really about one of my children. I have four biologic children who are kind of flesh and blood, but this is my baby, the Antifragility Initiative. And as I speak to you today, I would like to invite you to see our program, not just as an anti-gun violence initiative, but to reflect on its potential to help us build community by ensuring both equity as well as the dreams of all people in Northeast Ohio. So whether they want to be astronauts or bankers or good mothers and fathers, that's the possibility, and nothing encumbers that. I come from the lens of a pediatric surgeon, so I see the world from the manner in which we develop children. And I'd like to talk to you over the next 12 minutes or so in a whirlwind fashion about our program, how we got there, and what our program does. Our program, the Anti-Fragility Initiative, is a holistic, person-centered, hospital-based violence intervention program, which has as its byline Hemingway's quote, stronger in the broken places. And we all recognize that the world breaks us all, but many of us are stronger in the broken places. You would have to be living under a rock if you didn't recognize that we're in the midst of a major violence epidemic. And in fact, at the end of 2020, we saw a spike of about 50% in violence in the United States in our major cities, and that has been higher since that time. Here in Cleveland, we've seen about a 48% year-over-year uptick in the rate of gun violence during that period of time. And so many people look at gun violence and they say, oh, this is an urban problem. This doesn't really affect us. But in an article that came out in the Financial Times last week, which I think is even potentially apocryphal, we're seeing that over the last decade, American life expectancy has declined. And this is declining at a rate 4 times that of the rest of the industrialized world. Now, scholars from Princeton have said this is due to the disaffected males, but when we look closely and the so-called deaths of despair, when we look closely at that data, it's actually not in middle-aged white males. It's actually in young people. And in fact, 1 in 25 Americans over the age of 5 will die, or 1 in 25 5-year-olds will die before the age of 40. And that is driving our life expectancy down. And what's causing that gap is suicide, homicide, and drug overdoses. And so it is not deaths of despair in children, it's deaths of children. When we look at the leading cause of death from all sources for children, we see something that is quite distressing. That was reported in April of last year in the New England Journal of Medicine. As I direct you to where the arrows are, we see that in 2019, that was the crossover point in which we recognize that more children were dying as a result of guns than any other cause. And so I look at this slide with both some degree of despair, but with lots of hope. What we did early in my career in pediatric trauma prevention was to convince people to wear car seats and to use seat belts in children and look at the tremendous drop that has occurred. I feel hopeful that we can do the same thing when it comes to this gun violence epidemic that we're experiencing. Now, for many, when we think about gun deaths in children, we focus on these horrific mass shootings. But in fact, it is not these events that are driving up the incidence of guns and deaths in children. It is the violence that we see in places like Cleveland. And so I, in the work that I do, both locally and nationally, have come to feel that we are in the middle of what I would call a syndemic. And what a syndemic is a synergistic epidemic in which two epidemics aggregate to have greater synergistic effects than either alone. And although the president has just decided that we're at the end of the COVID epidemic, we're still seeing the residual effects of what I think enhanced despair that has been driving so much of what occurs. I feel strongly that we cannot legislate or police our way out of gun violence crisis. We have to lead our way out by developing a strong sense of community and organizations and individuals like you leaning in with your multiple talents to think about the collective solutions that will happen in order to do this. I also feel strongly that this is a public health issue. And let me talk to you a little bit about how I see this as a public health issue. I came to Cleveland. You heard I'm a kid who wanted to be an astronaut in a small southern town and was told I would never become that. Although my friend from the other side of town, whose dad played in my father's band, became one of the first African-American astronauts. I came to Cleveland in 2007 for my dream job, chief of surgery at Rainbow. And this in some ways was shattered by gun violence. And in fact, my first patient was a 15-year-old boy who looked like my 14-year-old son, who was killed in an episode of gun violence. And when I went deep into understanding Cleveland and the things that existed here, I realized that the children suffered under the weight of the social determinants of health. You see these things: highest child poverty rate, highest infant mortality, highest high school or school district suicide rate. And as someone who has been thinking about population health, I felt that this was something, in addition to my clinical work, that I needed to collaborate with people like Frank Jackson, the former mayor, and with Michael McGrath, the former chief of police, to think of strategies that would be effective. And we did. We collaborated, and in 2010, a program that we started resulted in the lowest murder rate in the history of Cleveland. And we parlayed that into a grant from the Defense Department. But when the money ran out, the violence rate went way up. This work took me to street corners, to crack dens, to the juvenile detention center, to churches, to rec centers. And I had a chance to talk with many people, often boys in their teenage years. And I realized that for many in Cleveland, that childhood in some parts of the city was blurred, and that many children had seen things that I could not imagine seeing at their age. And it had permanently altered their views of the future. And by the time they came to my clinic or to the operating room, I feel that they had fallen down a steep flight of stairs, and it was our responsibility to think about how we could flatten that landscape and change the horizon of hope for them. I had the worst week of my life, other than the passing of my parents, at the end of September, the beginning of October, when I took care of these 4 children, and in particular, the cherub that you see in the middle, who were shot. 3 of them died. And as a result of this experience, I was irrevocably changed by the moral injury that I experienced. And so, not knowing what to do, I looked at the notes in my moleskin that I had taken from my community experiences and began to craft a program that I would hope might begin to at least blunt this rising curve of violence and its downstream effects. When I looked at violence at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, we saw about 219 violent patients over about a 2-year period. That's more than doubled since then, between 16 and 17. And what this graph shows you is the gunshot wounds, a total of about 70, of which, and we take care of children between the ages of, for violence, 6 and 15. And so of those 70 children who were shot, we saw within a 2-year period of time that 30% of them would return with another gunshot wound injury. I can't imagine, including a 7-year-old, I can't imagine a 7-year-old getting shot once, much less twice. And to top that, 30% or a third of the patients we saw would be back with a major depressive episode, self-harm, or suicide. These fragile children growing up in chaotic environments were made more fragile by our concepts of treat them and street them. We had nothing more to offer them other than to send them back to the toxicity that they were engulfed in. So as I try to move through this quickly, we began to focus less on the vector, the gun or the bullets, and more on the victim and what we could do for the victim. We had gone deep to understand violence, and so I recognized that these were children who were hurt. And you know the statement that hurt people hurt people. And that we needed to change the language of violence in which we thought about this, especially within children. These were not individuals who were morally deficient, but these were people who were injured and healing. And as a healer, as a trauma surgeon, once I got my arms around the concept that these were injured patients who were healing, I recognize that it is healed people who heal people. And that's those of us who may have experienced trauma and recovered, or those of us who never have experienced trauma. So we developed this program, the Antifragility Initiative. I founded the program and with a medical student. It's built on the concept of Nassim Taleb, that anti-fragile is something that is broken, that when it's put back together, it is stronger than it was before. It is not fragile, meaning that it can't be reconstructed. And it's much like this kintsugi artwork and this is how we envision what we do. So we take these broken vessels and we put them together with our program using liquid gold. And they, we hope, are more beautiful, stronger after they've been broken and repaired. These are the core values of our program. There are 5: community, equity, prevention, opportunity, and care. And we aim to reduce re-victimization, to address the adverse symptoms of violence, to enhance the socio-emotional outcomes of the children, and to ensure that we don't create a hospital that re-traumatizes them when they return. We're a 1-year program, holistic, Person-centered, that is, we customize this to the individual. Holistic in the sense we understand them in the context of their environment, and we get to know them and build a relationship. You know, as many surgeons, we have adult ADD, and so these are the words, this is what we do, but I like to use the infogram that we have here. And in this informatic, you can see that we meet children in the emergency room after they've been traumatized, after they've been shot or beat up. We see this as being a teachable moment in which the most macho teenage boy or arrogant teenage girl is open because they may see a white light to what we have to say or teach. We heal their physical wounds, and within 48 hours, we're on the phone with their parents and with the kids if they've given us consent, and within their home, even in the projects, within a month, to understand who they are medically and from a mental health standpoint, to understand their spirituality, not necessarily their religion, but their sense of purpose, and to design this person-centered model incorporating resources from the community that we have funds for in order to help them. We ensure they have a health home, a medical home, mental health services. We provide food security. We provide 300 meals a weekend for our families that are in the program. We try to cover their basic needs, and we have housing assistance. And we also, as I mentioned, do mental health work. And we're supported through now $3.2 million that we've received from VOCA through the Attorney General's office. And I show Mike DeWine there. He was the one I initially presented this to. He told me, "Doctor, I have no time to listen to you." And he kept walking. He said, "Doc, I have no time to listen to you," and beckoned his security people. And 40 minutes later, we were still talking. And he said, "It's a great idea. If you get it on paper, we'll fund it." And so it was ultimately funded. This slide is a little bit dated. We've taken care of 1,500 children since the start of our program in 2019. We collaborate with community partners. This is a commentary I just wrote for Children's Magazine, but this is what I want to leave you with. We need to develop community partnerships that ensure equitable care for children. Build a research infrastructure, which we've done with Case Western, and we have publications, and that we need to look at a variety of intervention programs. I close by saying to you, this is one of the quotes that I often hate. It says, "It takes a village to raise a child." I hate this not because I don't believe it, but I ask, who builds the village? And as I look at you on the screen, I say to you that we build the village. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to go over a little bit. I hope my passion was not offensive, but I'm open to questions. Thank you so much.
Dr. Barksdale, thank you so much. You mentioned the partners in your work. So can you share a little more about who you do partner with to provide those services and what additional partnerships you're seeking?
Yes. So we partner with anyone who will hear our message and who will resonate. So we look at the talents that our children have or that they aspire to have. So we partner with Karamu House for children who are interested in participating in the performing arts. We pilot with Peacemakers Alliance, Maisha Crow, because some of our kids need very strong male or very strong models who have street credibility for them. Mental health services through May Dugan. We partnered with Case Western Reserve School of Medicine. We have medical students working with our program to help with tutoring and teaching. We partner with the Cleveland Police. We are open to anyone who can offer resources. I see our program as a convener, meaning that we bring the children under the fold and we will aim to create relationships with whoever might be able to benefit our kids. Our biggest challenge is fundraising. We go cycle to cycle with VOCA. We have received funding from the Cleveland Foundation. I have been speaking with the Ford Foundation. I just got back from Stanford a couple days ago. So funding is our greatest source, but we're open. And what I see our program is an open source program. So I'm open to people saying, "Ed, I don't like that idea. Have you thought about this?"
Did you use ACEs as a tool to gauge trauma in those that you serve?
Yes. I went over the 10 to 12 minutes that you allotted me. We have a whole, this is all, the picture that shows the little boys. There's follow-up to that in which we did ACEs on our participants. The average ACE on our pre-participants and our participants, the average ACEs of our children who participate in our program is 4.5. We have several children who are as high as 9. And as those of you who understand ACEs know that when you get above 6, the life expectancy is diminished 20 years. And so our children, some are often caught in the crossfire. We have a number of children who were in their living room on the floor when their house was being sprayed with bullets. And one of the 4 girls was killed. The others are traumatized by the loss of their cousin, their sister. So we have when we look at gun violence, we also look at the collateral effects that it has on others.
You mentioned the number of children that you've been able to serve. What are some of the outcomes for those children that have participated in the program?
So some have left and not come back. But of our participants, we had a 30% recidivism rate. We only have 2 patients who have come back with recurrent episodes of violence. And so that is an important goal. We have some patients or I should say participants who were struggling in high school and now are A students. And so we have some incredible stories. Some who are paralyzed and were planning to be athletes who are now developing to be very good musicians. But I think that, a program like this, the most important outcome is not what they achieve, but the fact that we can preserve their talents to contribute to society in a positive way. And so I think that sometimes we look to say that a kid goes to X school or does this as a sign of success. The fact that he or she is alive and is a member of a family and can love and be loved is a major achievement.
Has this program been replicated in other communities?
Yeah, so we are the 3rd pediatric program that exists in the country. The adult programs, there are many adult programs. Where our program is different, and how we made our program novel is that all the other programs in the country have the patients come to them. We go to the patients, or the participants afterwards. And Ed Barksdaleism, as the medical students here say, is that healthcare occurs in the hospital, health occurs in the community. And so although we're hospital-based, we aim to promote health and to address the social determinants of health by being in the community and helping us understand each patient and participant in a person-centered way in the context of their community culture. We see this from an anthropological standpoint, that not every child, not every Black or brown or white child is the same, not every neighborhood is the same. This concept of bespoke, customized, or person-centered is what we aim to do.
Do you find that some of your families also need legal support, and do you partner with any legal entities in the community?
We find that many of them need legal support. We refer them. We don't particularly partner. So the challenge is we have 4 social workers. And what I learned with a new project is that we have to get skinny. That is to stay within a lane of focus. So when we first started the program, there was lots of critiques that we would not be sustainable after our initial round of funding. And so our social workers connect to the legal aid services, but we don't have an immediate partnership. That would be great if we had that relationship. We've not aggressively pursued that because we don't have a point person who could manage that.
That actually leads into the next question is, for those organizations represented here or the needs that you have, how might someone reach out to talk about forming a partnership for this program?
216-844-8623. Edward.barksdale@uhhospitals.com. You can reach out to me directly. My email there has too many periods between Edward and Barksdale, but I would be very open. I'd love to have someone, if they could, to come have lunch with me and help me and help us grow and help Cleveland, if we can, grow together.
How do you maintain resiliency with having to work through so many traumatic experiences and seeing that the situations that you deal with? What keeps you going each day?
Well, the first thing to tell you is that I don't like the word or use the word resilience or resiliency. I think that in general, it does not apply to many of us, right? If you're shot, you're never going to be the same person you were before. And to me, the concept of resilience is bouncing back. I use the term anti-fragility, which is to embrace the fractures that we have and to look with community to fill those in. So it's, instead of bouncing back, it's bouncing forward. And so along those lines, the way that I keep myself anti-fragile is through a strong sense of spirituality that as my grandmother would tell me growing up, that I was born on purpose, for purpose. My community, and my grandmother would always also tell me that it's not really a community for you. A community is a group of people that you live for or you live with, but it's your common unity. And common unity is the people that I can be for and the people who can be for me. And so it's that combination of spirituality and common unity and a desire to live in an anti-fragile way, to not avoid injury or hurt, but to figure out how I can fill that in so that I can be more humane and more understanding for the people, the community, my family, and the country that I serve.
Is there a group locally, nationally, that speaks for the medical community around gun violence as a public health issue?
For the medical community, not so much, but for the global community in which physicians are involved in, that's Everytown. And I'm a frequent speaker for them and involved with them. It's Everytown and Moms Demand Action have come together to do that. There is an emerging program that I'm involved in here locally that I'm not completely at liberty to discuss, that's looking at gun violence with a core group of people that we're attempting to raise a very large amount of money. I'll just tell you, it's $100 million in order to do something nationally. And the Northwell Hospital in New York and their CEO is at the cutting edge of kind of the hospital efforts around the country. He has amassed CEOs, although our three major CEOs in the city have not joined this effort. 100 others have, and I suspect they will. But we hope to bring together a strong group of physicians and other healthcare providers to address the gun violence. Now, I want to make sure that I emphasize to you is that for me, it's so much more about violence than the guns. If we get too close to the concept of guns, then we have people who feel we're taking away their Second Amendment rights. Our program is focused on the victims. And we know that someone who is shot has a high likelihood of shooting someone else. So we're looking at breaking the cycle by managing the victim. And if we can manage despair, I think despair is the number one priority in this country at the present time. It's affecting the financial market, employment, and life expectancy. If we can address that, then we can get back to the type of communities, common unities that we had before. We need a restoration and community building by such organizations as yours to help us kind of right position ourselves.
We have time for one last question, and that is, what can those of us on the call today do to help support your important work?
Well, it's I think that you can think creatively in your own spaces as to what you might be able to contribute to, if you will, the creative brain trust that we have. That would be really helpful. But I think the common contributions that we all think of are the 3 T's: the time, talent, and treasures. If there are avenues that you think we can achieve funding, or foundations that you can direct us to, or assistance with putting our things together for foundations, or if any of you are so philanthropically inclined to support our program through Rainbow, that would be great. But I'm most excited for a group like this with the kind of the talent, trust, and the insights and relationships that you guys have, and how we can leverage this all for the benefit of Cleveland.
Dr. Barksdale, thank you so very much for your time today, and a sincere thank you for the amazing work that you're doing every day to address gun violence. And I think you have the support of those on this call, and we'll reach into our networks to see how we can assist in chipping away at this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.